Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. A lot is happening in the world today, and we will be touching on two major issues that have been making headlines in the world in the past week, especially the developments coming in. But first, let's talk a little about the escalation in the Middle East between the US and Iran. The German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, in a meeting with Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif today, has shown solidarity with Iran, saying Germany stands by Iran's fulfilling its commitments to the JCPOA. He's even said that Germany will help Iran financially. The Foreign Minister of Iran, Javad Zarif, has said that Iran is offering a proposal for regional talks, given that only way to reduce tensions in this region is to stop this economic war. And those who have launched this war, he has said, should try to remain sane. Now, a lot more was said during this press conference that was held today as Heiko Maas arrived in Iran yesterday. But we will be discussing all of that. Let's also keep in mind this comes a day after Javad Zarif declared on Sunday that the European countries are in no position to criticize Iran, as his German counterpart Heiko Maas landed in Tehran. Now, Foreign Minister Zarif reiterated the 60-day deadline for EU states to grant sanctions relief in order for Tehran to continue adhering to the nuclear accord. Now, to discuss this issue in detail, we will be speaking to our panel of experts. Let me introduce Mr. Ahmed Jamal, Al-Ahmad, an analyst. He is joining us from Beirut. Also, we have Mr. Abdel Bari Atwan, an analyst joining us from London. And as well as on the line with us from Istanbul is Borzou Daragahi, a journalist. Welcome to Newswire, all three of you. We're very eager to get into this development as it takes place. Let me start with you, Mr. Ahmed Jamal. What do you make of the Foreign Minister of Germany in Tehran showing his solidarity and also expressing how they stand behind Iran having remained in its commitments to JCPOA?
Thank you for having me. It's not so much that Germany is standing behind Iran. They're standing behind the commitments, the agreement of the JCPOA. And that tells you the strength of international agreements. I mean, the future with regards to U.S. involvement is a bit shaky. And the European Union, specifically the parties to the agreement, France, Germany, and Britain, have stayed consistent in that Iran is complying with the agreement, and particularly in terms of their obligations, and therefore there is no need for the European Union to impose any sanctions or to make life difficult for the Iranian regime, the government. Iran needs to sell oil. It needs hard currency to fund its operations regionally, and so far they have been in compliance. And it's only the U.S. that needs or wants, politically speaking, to renegotiate. And I don't think that will happen.
You don't think that will happen? Well, Mr. Abdel Bari Atwan, if I could get your expert opinion on this as well. This is not just lip service, or is it? Because the situation has been tense for the past many weeks since last year, since the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA. And as escalations rise in the Middle East, do you feel that Iran, having come out with a statement on Sunday saying, in a way, almost threatening the European Union, was that an empty threat?
No, it's not empty threat at all. It is a kind of pressure on European Union to commit themselves fully to the agreement they have signed. So Iran was very clear. Iran gave the European Union 2 months to normalize the economic relation with Iran. Until now, actually, they did very, very little in this field. So the Iranians are extremely worried. Look, they're saying to them, if you don't want to normalize the economic relation, we will actually stop our commitment to the nuclear deal. So you have to choose. But they cannot actually listen to sweet talks from the European all the time and no action at all. So I believe the Iranians were very, very, very clear here. We had enough. You stopped importing oil from us, the Iranian oil. You are not, most of the European companies actually withdrew from Iran and commit itself fully to the trade with the United Nations, to the sanction of United Nations on Iran. So this cannot continue forever. It seems Germans realize that the Iranians are deadly serious, and that's why actually the foreign minister now in Tehran and trying to cool down the crisis and trying maybe to give a lip service to European maybe he's give some promise to the Iranian, please cool down, please wait, let us sort out what will happen. It is very tense moment. There is, indication that America is preparing for a war against Iran. We are not actually enthusiastic to go to this war. So let us wait until see what will happen.
Okay, so Mr. Borzou, the press conference, you saw the press conference between the German foreign minister, the Iranian foreign minister. There was one mention there by Heiko Maas about the Instex, that it will be soon ready. Now, there's a lot of debate going on about whether this Instex, the machinery that will allow trade between European states and Iran, is even enough or effective enough. What is your take on that?
Well, it remains to be seen. Not all of the details about Instex have been published. Not all of it has come out yet. We're not sure how it's going to work. I mean, the basic problem is that in order for sanctions relief to work, in order for the Europeans to uphold their part of the bargain, it was in the nuclear deal, private companies, we're talking about Germany, France, the EU, we're talking about private companies that are not under government control. Maybe they're, big companies that are under government influence, but they have to answer to their shareholders, first of all. And they have to look at their profits. And, the bottom line is the U.S. is a, economic behemoth, and they have threatened to punish any company severely that does business with Iran. So it's a very tough dilemma. The Europeans could pass laws making it a crime to abide by U.S. extraterritorial sanctions. But, that's an extreme measure. Companies that are, huge companies like Total or BP and so on, ENI in Italy and so on. And so that's the dilemma of this whole issue. There's another issue that, Iran is not a very friendly environment for investors. It's a tough, and attractive.
So, sorry, I know, Mr. Borzou, you said that there isn't much clarity yet because the Instex and how it would work has not yet been floated publicly. But is there any understanding of if it does come into effect, as the German foreign minister said, that it will be ready soon and that they will financially help Iran? Do we have an idea how that would work without sort of stirring the ire of the U.S. for continuing to trade with Iran that they have sanctioned?
It's based on a bartering system whereby the Iranians would conduct transactions in their own currency, and the Europeans would conduct transactions in their own currencies, and then trade those trade products across the that's in theory how it's supposed to work. The U.S. has said that they don't mind as long as it's being used for non-sanctioned goods, i.e. humanitarian goods, foodstuffs, medicine, and so on. If that's what it's going to be used for, that's fine. And anything that goes beyond that, they will punish the U.S.
But that doesn't leave much for Iran to operate on or rely on, since most of their exports are oil-based, oil products and petrochemicals have again now recently been also sanctioned with new U.S. sanctions.
Yeah, I mean, it's crippling to the Iranian economy, and Iran knows that. But the dilemma is that who's going to buy Iranian oil? What company is going to risk the ire of the United States? The U.S. Justice Department has proven time again that it's willing to go after international companies, prevent them from doing business in the United States, the world's largest and most important market. If they do business before, they'll do it again.
So do you feel that this recent visit to Tehran of Heiko Maas coming and speaking to the foreign minister, they've talked about how important issues of the region, how trade has been discussed. Do you feel that this might be helpful in the current situation in de-escalating tensions? Do you expect much out of this?
I mean, I think it is helpful. I think diplomacy in this particular situation is always helpful. You also have the Japanese foreign minister coming to Iran. You have the Lebanese head of general security coming to Iran, all trying to cool things down, all trying to make diplomacy work. It's right after the Ramadan holidays, so this is a big, busy working week for everyone. But I'm not sure what good it will do because the Iranian economy is tanking. It's contracting rather rapidly, but not enough to really get them to move. Not it's not collapsing.
It's not collapsing. Thank you so much, Borzou. That's a really point you've raised there. And I want to bring you in here, Mr. Abdel Bari, Atwan. If we could get your take on this, is Iran right now standing at the crossfire of a collapsing economy? Is it really at its last leg, or does it have the potential to pose as a regional threat that U.S. makes it of?
Yes, so we have to definitely. Iran is passing through a very, very difficult time. The sanction is biting, definitely. China stopped its oil import from Iran, which is the biggest customer, actually. Turkey did the same. Europe actually are very reluctant to continue the import from Iranian oil. So definitely, oil revenue is the most important arms of the Iranian economy. But we have to remember one thing, the Iranian actually were under sanction for the last 40 years. They get used to these kind of sanctions and blockade by the American in particular. So they can adapt in a way or another. Other ways, actually, they have definitely a lot of channels in order to sell their oils, whether legally or illegally. There are a lot of customers, and if they reduce the price of oil a little bit, they will find a lot of people. If the Islamic State, Daesh, managed to sell equal to $3 million of oil to the international community through, Kurdistan of Iraq, through Turkey, I think, the Iranian will manage to find ways actually to export their oil. But we have to remember that there is a huge difference. There is no comparison between Islamic State and Iran. Iran is a huge state. It is a regional power. So they are entitled, and they should actually export their oil without any problems. The American actually is pushing Iran toward a collapse. They want to change the regime, and they use the economic sanction as a way to change the regime, as a way to incite the Iranian to revolt against the regime. I don't think it will work. Iran sent two strong messages to the American. First, when they attacked, or some of their actually allies attacked the oil tankers in Fujairah of United States.
Something that Iran refused to take responsibility for.
The American accused Iran of being behind this attack on Fujairah, and 4 oil tankers were actually damaged. And also, through their allies in Yemen, they sent 7 drones to actually bomb the oil, pipelines in Saudi Arabia. So I think, if Iran is pushed to the corner, I think they will react.
So this really, sorry to cut you there, but this really poses the question then, Mr. Ahmed Jamal, is what kind of regional importance does it have, the potential to create chaos? If you could sort of expand for us, where are the major threats to the U.S. and its allies in the region from Iran?
Well, first, let's make one thing clear. Iran is not going to undermine its obligations because it needs the EU as much as the EU needs Iran to stay committed to its obligations. Yes, Iran's economy is tanking. It's, I wouldn't say collapsing. And again, like your previous expert said, that they've been going through sanctions for the past few decades. So there is a black market for Iranian oil that's below the surface. But again, Iran needs to expand its sales in oil in order to fund its regional operations and activity beyond its current capacity. So I don't think, I doubt Iran, even though they are threatening. Again, this is just threats. It's trying to bring the European Union to the table to not to renegotiate the JCPOA, but perhaps to find common ground on where they can at least agree to normalize economic activity. But in regards to threat, I don't see Iran actually escalating beyond verbal and any other activity because it can't afford to. It really can't afford to.
It can't afford to, Mr. Abdel Bari, or that it doesn't want to? Because the question really is the escalation, the sort of presence of militias in Syria, in Lebanon, in what Israel has been claiming. Isn't U.S. essentially trying to protect its ally Israel and be working on its behest on information against Iran?
I think, this tension in the Gulf simply because the United States doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear capacity, or to have also the ballistic missiles technology. They want to protect the Israelis. That's the whole thing. The American are realizing that the balance of power now is shifting against the Israelis, especially in the traditional weapons. So I think that's why we have this tension. And they are putting this pressure on the Iranian, hoping that they will throw the towel, they will actually raise the white flag and stop these ballistic missiles, which could be impose a threat to the Israeli and also the and certain small Gulf countries. But whether the American will succeed or not, we have to wait and see. But the Iranian, actually, they have also a pressure or a card of pressure against the United States and its ally in the region. Especially, they have paramilitary troops. They have Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, or popular mobilization in Iraq. They have Hamas in Gaza. They have also the Ansarullah, the Houthis in Yemen. And they can use them. They can actually, Iran doesn't need to fight a war with the American, a direct war, but they can hurt the American, and they can hurt the Israelis, and they can hurt also Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. So I believe it is, now it is actually a competition of finger bitings. We want to know, or we wouldn't know who is going to scream first in this struggle of wills between the two sides, the American and its allies and the Iranian and its allies. So I believe the Iranian now, in a stronger position because they can hurt the American allies on the Gulf, and they can also block the naval trades, whether via the Red Sea, via Bab el-Mandeb, via Hormuz Strait, and they send, as I said, a very clear message to the American and to the Gulf states that we can reach you when they actually managed to bomb 4 oil tankers without leaving any stamps there, without leaving any evidence. This is a very, very sophisticated operation, and the Iranian proved that they can actually hurt the enemies, especially and when it comes to the economy. You want to placate our economy, you want to impose sanction against us, okay, we can also hurt you, we can hurt your oil industry completely.
Right. So, Mr. Ahmad, do you agree with what Mr. Abdel is saying, that it is that maybe the U.S. has gotten itself in a fix right now, that essentially Iran is in a stronger position on this escalation of tensions?
Well, let me point out, I mean, we have to understand the pattern of the Trump administration vis-a-vis their strategy, albeit whatever strategy it is. They're more into escalating verbally and threatening, and at some point, they will come to the table. But again, like they did with Mexico, they're used to bullying, and they know Iran is not is in compliance with their obligations. The Trump administration knows that. The U.S. intelligence community knows that. The European Union knows that. So they know that they need to use this facade in order to tell their voters come 2020 that, look, we pressured Iran, we spoke big, we threatened them, and they submitted, and we finally got them to agree. So this is all for the 2020 elections. I don't think the U.S. can afford also to escalate. Neither of the sides want any escalation, whether it's the Saudis, whether it's the Iranians or the European Union, because they all depend on that regional economic activity. They need that. Right. And let's not forget, there is a trilateral meeting right now, the security leaders between Israel, Russia, and the U.S. happening this month in June. To discuss regional security issues. Now, Israel does want Iran crippled beyond any capacity to do anything in terms of military, but the world has begun to understand what the Israeli intentions are. You know, it's crying wolf.
And there is also a hope that maybe Russia might come to the table for the sake of Iran in its defense. Mr. Abdel Bari, what do you think? Are there other countries, maybe even Russia, China, that might come to support or make a dent, at least in this situation, to bring it down in favor of Iran?
Well, actually, the Russian, yes, they are going to attend this meeting, and they have good relation with the Israelis. And we know that the main purpose of this meeting actually to look at the Iranian presence in Syria and trying to find a way out of this. I believe that the Russian wouldn't actually sacrifice their good relation with Iran, especially they are working together in Syria against the terrorist groups there. So, and also they cannot actually give the Israeli everything. I think this meeting is a normal meeting. We can't actually put a lot of hope that it will come with a strategy. So Russia will be closer to the Israelis, closer to the American, to John Bolton theory in order to escalate the war in the region against Iran. So I personally, I believe still Iran is a stronger position. Still Iranian, they have a lot of cards which they can use against the American, against the Israelis, against their allies in the I know the Iranian, and we noticed that the Iranian, when John Bolton and Trump sent the aircraft carrier to the region, they did not actually budge. They did not throw the white or actually raise the white flag. They still in full control, and they still exporting oil, in a way or another. Maybe it is a small amount, 400,000 barrel a day. But still, they could increase it anytime. So
right.
I think, the
Iran
American
is in a stronger position here, and the U.S. is continuing to pressurize Iran in the region. We have come to the end of this segment for now. Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed Jamal and Mr. Abdel Bari Atwan, and also Mr. Borzou for your valuable input here. We will be taking a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Today, in the second part of our program, we will be discussing a statement by the U.S. envoy to Israel, David Friedman, where he says Israel has the right to annex some of the West Bank land. Is the open support shown by U.S. again for Israel's illegal occupation on Palestinian lands is something we will be discussing. But also ahead in the show, we will be talking about something else that's been making headlines. U.S. has condemned Turkey for drilling in the eastern Mediterranean waters of Cyprus, potentially foiling its ally Israel's pipeline deal. To discuss more, we have with us Mr. Gideon Levy, a journalist joining us from Tel Aviv. And also we have with us Dr. Ghazai Hamad, the former Deputy Foreign Minister, joining us from Gaza. Welcome to the show, Mr. Gideon. What is your take on what the U.S. envoy to Israel said, David Friedman, in terms of the annexation of the West Bank is pretty much the right of Israel?
It's not surprising at all. It comes after a chain of changes in the American policy toward the Palestinians and toward Israel, including recognizing the occupation in the Golan Heights, including obviously the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem. The current administration in the United States decided to go hand to hand with the Israeli most extreme right-wingers, with the settlers. That's a major change. It might also inspire other right-wing governments in the world to follow them. And it promises a new era in the Middle East, because by this they finally killed the two-state solution, obviously.
Would you say this is a provocative statement, especially now that we are getting a press statement from the Palestinian ministry condemning his remarks and saying that they'll file a case against him for saying this statement?
No, I think they mean it. I think that what happened is that the current administration decided to follow blindly and automatically the Israeli right-wing nationalists. And whatever they want, they get now, almost a carte blanche to go wild. And we just have to hope that this period will be as short as possible, and Donald Trump will not be re-elected, because if this will continue, the Palestinian people has no chance and justice has no chance.
Absolutely. And the Palestinian ministry has come out and said that they will file a complaint against these remarks made by the U.S. envoy in the International Criminal Court. Do you think this response from the Palestinian ministry, and if it does go ahead and file this complaint, will kind of trigger any kind of international community support for the Palestinians?
Unfortunately not. The Palestinians are as isolated as never before. I don't see any Western government standing against Donald Trump on this. By the end of the day, we are dealing with the President of the United States, with all its meanings. And I think that those steps that they take are just show how desperate they are and quite helpless. We have just to hope that this really cruel wave and ugly wave will be as short as possible.
Also, David Friedman said that the Palestinian leaders were the reason behind the economic forum that planned to be held in Bahrain in the near future, were pressurizing business leaders from the Palestinian community to cooperate and participate in this. Do you see any kind of credibility in this claim?
Yes, the Palestinians are trying to put some sticks in the wheels of those steps like the economical conference in Bahrain, because they understand that all those steps are just one big funeral to their self-determination dream. Because the current administration in the United States believes that money can answer everything and money can buy everything. But I don't believe that the Palestinians who are struggling for their freedom for 100 years now, I don't see them surrender or selling themselves for money. And therefore, yes, they will try their best as much as they can, which is very limited, to prevent those conferences which are one-sided and destructive to take place, sure.
So doesn't this also imply what David Friedman also said, that there is a silent majority within the Palestinians themselves who want to accept Trump's peace plan for Israel and Palestine then?
That's ridiculous. I mean, by the end of the day, we should see the real substance of Friedman's declaration. Friedman's declaration means that there is no international law anymore, that no international resolutions are valid because the United States changed its policy. This is unheard of because the occupation is illegal and criminal, and no state in the world until now recognized 1 inch of this occupation. And there are endless international resolutions by the most important international forums which condemn the occupation, which define the occupation as illegal, by the way, by the support of the United States. The Security Council just a few years ago got a resolution which declared that all the settlements are illegal, and the United States, by Obama, supported it. So now comes an ambassador and says what was illegal, what was criminal, is now legitimate. This is really outrageous.
It's outrageous for sure, but then do you feel that the international community is going to take a stand against this, or is it pretty much a validity for America to continue the support, unending support for Israel?
I'm afraid that except of some lip service and maybe some condemnations, I don't see the international community standing against Donald Trump, for sure not side to side with the Palestinians, because you can see the sense of fatigue of the West from this whole conflict. They lost hope, they lost interest, they have other issues in the West, mainly in Europe. And I think that as long as the United States will continue with this policy, this will be the world's position, with some objection, obviously. But by the end of the day, nobody is really going to struggle against it in meaningful means.
Right. And also, let's talk a little about the economic forum that is being planned in Bahrain. We've seen Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, making a sort of attempt to get Morocco on board to try and get regional support. Do you feel that he is lacking?
Until now, he had many obstacles because two of the most major actors, namely Jordan and Egypt, did not join it yet. Maybe they will break because there is a lot of pressure put on them, and both of them depend on the United States and the United States money. But until now, you don't see any kind of enthusiasm in the Arab world to join this ridiculous forum. And I have very little expectations. I mean, even if Egypt and Jordan will join, even if the EU will join, by the end of the day, what is it about? It is about buying the Palestinians, and this will not happen.
And what do you think is the attempt here for this economic forum, especially when there isn't even a political solution in sight?
But that's exactly the problem. This wrong belief that money can buy everything, and money can also buy freedom, and money can also buy justice, and money can also buy any kind of political content. This is going to fail, even if for the short run it might tempt some who will believe that if we'll just give enough money to the PA, to the Palestinian Authority, and there will be more jobs and more industry and a better economy, by this the Palestinians will give up their freedom. This showed already in history, in so many precedents, that this doesn't work. It might work for a very short range, but for the long run, the problem still is
remains.
As strong as...
Just one last question, Mr. Gideon. You wrote recently an article about a scenario where the Palestinians and the Israelis could live together in cohesion. If you could expand a little on this situation that you envisage for the region for us, please.
First of all, Palestinians and Israelis are living together now for 100 years. The only problem is that they are living under an unjust regime. And the idea is, after we have to admit the two-state solution is dead, and we are going to live together if we want it or not, the real struggle should be from now on, both in the world and here in the region, all about equal rights. And that should be the challenge. Equal rights, one person, one vote, one state with real democracy. It is elementary. It is so natural to ask for it, and it sounds so horrific for most of the actors right now. But to wait a few years, and I believe that this will be the real challenge.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Gideon. Dr. Ghazi, this statement by David Friedman, the U.S. Special Envoy to Israel, he's come out and said something quite provocative. He's basically endorsing the occupation, the illegal occupation of Israel, of Palestinian land. Do you think his statement is going to really make much of a difference at a time when it is well known where U.S. stands?
First, we know this ambassador, he's a Zionist. He's a supporter of Israel. He's a supporter of the settlements. He neglects the Palestinians. He never recognized that there is a Palestinian people. He does not take care about the Palestinian national rights. So I think he, all the time, is just focusing on the rights of Israel and everything in the West Bank, in Gaza, in killing the Palestinians, in taking the Golan Heights. So I think he is 100% Zionist, supportive of Israel, never talking about the Palestinian national rights. I think he tried to encourage Israel to annex part of the West Bank. He reflects the vision of the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. He wants to gain more votes in Israel, and he wants to get more support in Israel. But
so you think his statement was a politically motivated statement, really won't have any effect in the international stage, considering that the U.S. has backed, especially the Trump administration has continuously backed Israel in all its moves in the past year, especially?
This is part of the American game against the Palestinians. Mr. Kushner, Greenblatt, and Friedman and Trump, these four persons who just put the Palestinians map on their table, and they want to distribute everything. They want to change the whole equations. They want the Palestinians to be the slaves of Israel, right. And they want the whole Palestinian, historical Palestine, to be under the control of Israel. I think now all the Palestinian factions today and yesterday, they denied the statements of the American ambassadors. They consider that this is part of the giving Israel more spaces in order to take more lands in the Palestinian territories and also to continue occupation of the West Bank.
Right. So also, Dr. Ghazi, the Palestinian ministry has come out and complained about this statement. They said they will file a complaint in the ICC. This is obviously going to cause an uproar, not just from the ministry itself, but in terms of the support that Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, really needed at a time when he's coming out with the deal of the century.
I think we as a Palestinian, we have to take some practices in order to convince Israel and the Trump administration to stop all these stupid measures and stupid statements. I think the President Abbas should take a previous step in order to stop recognizes Israel, because Israel does not recognize the right of the Palestinians and the right of return in the 67 borders. He should take some measures in order to convince Israel and Trump administration to stop this playing with time, to convince him also that West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem is part of Palestine, and we should not give any concessions for this. But I think now the Palestinians, they want to go to ICC. ICC will take long time, many years, wasting more time, and finally they will give the Palestinians nothing.
Okay, so let's talk about the international community bodies are not doing much in terms of what Israel is illegally occupying lands belonging to Palestinians. But what is your take on when Jared Kushner goes to Morocco? Is he trying to shore up support for this economic conference to be held in Bahrain? So does that imply that there is not enough support behind Jared Kushner and President Trump's idea of what Israel and Palestine should be like?
The administration, they are very stupid. They are wasting time. They are wasting money. No one now is listening to Trump, what's called the deal of the century, because now all the Palestinians, first of all the Palestinians in the left and right, they are against and they reject the Trump plan.
Right.
And I think most of the Arab countries, they reject the American plan. So I think they will never find anyone who support their plan in the Palestine. So I think now Trump will fail in his plan, and he will. I think he will try to find some ways in order to make more pressure in some Arabic countries to join the Bahrain conference.
Right.
But I think till now, there is no one Palestinians want to join this conference,
and
there is no.
You have not much confidence here in what Jared Kushner is doing in President Trump's plan of the deal of the century. Thank you so much, Dr. Ghazai Hamad. This time, just yesterday, we heard a statement coming from the ambassador to Cyprus, the U.S. ambassador, showing concern, Judith Garber showing concern over what Turkey is doing, drilling in the eastern Mediterranean waters of Cyprus, potentially foiling Israel's pipeline deal. To discuss more on this, I'd like to introduce our guests who are just joining us. We have Dr. Zenonas Tziarras. He's a researcher at PRIO Cyprus Center. Also, we have with us Mr. Yusuf Erim, an analyst joining us from TRT. Thank you so much for coming to the news, to the show. Let me start with you, Mr. Yusuf. The issue over Cyprus in the international waters, whether it is between the contentious bone of contention of the economic zone or the continental shelf, this has been going on for many years now. If you could just highlight for us what the current issue brings into the forefront in terms of what the international law says over this.
There's been problems between Turkey, Cyprus, and Greece. Let's call it the triangle between the three. Since 1974, when Turkey launched a military operation to protect the rights of Turkish Cypriots. And ever since then, there's been a lot of maritime disputes over borders, maritime borders, and whatnot. And the latest dispute is now occurring because of the great expanse of wealth that's found inside the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, Cyprus wants to perform drilling in certain areas of its exclusive economic zone, but Turkey has its own concerns. One of Turkey's concerns is will Greek Cypriots share the profits from this drilling with the Turkish Cypriots who are on the northern side of the island. Now, the northern side, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, isn't recognized by the world. The only country that recognizes it is Turkey, but the fact is that there does exist a northern half of the island. Another problem right now is that the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus being an island, is very, very distorted. It impedes on Turkey's exclusive economic zone. The continental shelves of Cyprus and Turkey also are very, very close to each other. So Turkey wants to protect its rights to the natural resources inside the Eastern Mediterranean as well. And Turkey feels that there should be a bilateral, or if need be, a trilateral agreement on these borders, on where these exclusive economic zones start and begin. And maritime law does state that these agreements need to be bilateral, trilateral, not just another third party or the European Union saying this is your exclusive economic zone, this is your exclusive economic zone. There needs to be a delimitation of these zones where they're not impeding and they're not, the abstractness of an island is not taking more of this exclusive economic zone than it should.
Right. It is definitely a complicated issue that's not only just involving international law, maritime law, but also the geography of the island. To understand it better, let's take a look at this report.
Cyprus is an island country. It is the third largest and most populated island in the eastern Mediterranean, located 456 kilometers south of Turkey, 508 kilometers west of Syria. It is 472 kilometers northwest of Israel and 956 kilometers north of Egypt. Greece is even further away, 1,000 kilometers to the northwest. 4.5 trillion cubic feet of gas discovered off the southern Cyprus coast in 2011. The Energy Triangle is a natural gas extraction plan between three allied countries, Cyprus, Israel and Greece. The trio agreed to use the gas fields of Tamar, Leviathan and Aphrodite west of Israel. Turkey also claims the right to energy exploration of the coast of the divided island. Turkey's first drilling ship is the Fateh. In 2018, it was sent to a location 413 kilometers from Antalya on Turkey's southern coast. In the map, you can see Turkey's drilling site marked in red and Israel's drilling sites colored in yellow. This clearly shows the disputed sixth block, for instance, falls within the limits of Turkey's 322-kilometer continental shelf. Under international law, national territories have a continental shelf of up to 322 kilometers, while islands have territorial waters extending up to 23 kilometers.
Let's go further from what the international law says and where there are grey areas when drilling in these very turbulent waters, especially when it comes to trying to extract the great resource that it is now proven to have. Dr. Zenonas, if I could get your take on how Greece also sort of, the Greek Cypriot administration also sort of rushed into this deal, and the US's stake in it as they've expressed concern how Turkey continues to drill in these waters.
Well, we first need to clarify a few things because I would say that some of the things that were heard before were not entirely accurate. I mean, the international law of the sea does not allow for any country to drill in a non-delimited space. The space where the drill ship of Turkey is right now is non-delimited. And according to international law and the method of the median line, it would be, if delimited with Turkey, be within the Cypriot sovereign rights. Therefore, Turkey, and I agree that there should be delimitation, but Turkey is basically going beyond what they should do, what they can do based on the international law, which, by the way, they have not signed or ratified the Law of the Sea Convention of 1982. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of the pipeline, the Republic of Cyprus is, of course, allowed to, as an internationally recognized state and a member of the EU, is allowed to come into agreements with other states or companies to exploit the natural gas or any other resource that the Republic owns. And of course, there has been no profits so far. There will be presumably some profits in the course of a few years from now, maybe 10 to 15 years. And the Republic of Cyprus has made clear that profits from that part of the profits will go to a natural gas fund that will be distributed with the Turkish Cypriots in the case of the resolution of the conflict in Cyprus.
Right, but where does the US's stake comes in here? We're talking about reserves that could amount to essentially 4.5 trillion cubic feet. That is a lot of money for the region, of course, in itself. Cyprus is sitting on a hotbed of untapped resources. How does the US come into play here? Could you tell us a little about what political agenda it might have at stake here?
Of course, the U.S. is very much interested in having a say in how the energy architecture of the region is developing, as well as it's interested in seeing the region prospering and being stable. So they care very much about the deals that are being made, and they care very much about any tensions that exist. So they would like to see any tensions between Turkey and Greece or Turkey and Cyprus being alleviated, and that's why they urge, on the one hand, Turkey to stop these actions, and on the other hand, they urge the Cypriot leadership to move on towards resolving the conflict in Cyprus.
Right, that's an interesting point you raised there. I want to come back to you, Yusuf. The 2 points essentially. First, hit on something that he said earlier, was that the law basically determines that Cyprus has a right to drill. And will eventually share profits with the Turkish Cypriots. But then doesn't that also bring into question that in order to go ahead with drilling, it would also need consent from its northern part?
Of course, it would definitely need consent from its northern part. And we have to remember that Cyprus is an island. Its presence is distorting the exclusive economic zone. So just because there needs to be equitable profit sharing in the area, not just between northern Cyprus and southern Cyprus. Mm-hmm. Now, also Turkey's rights in the region also need to be protected with its exclusive economic zone. Now, we have to remember that every country has entitlement in the area, but there's also delimitation. These are not the same types of things. Now, also, I wanted to touch on what you were saying earlier with the United States coming into the matter. This is actually very important. I think one of the things that the United States is very concerned about is Russia slowly making its way down into the warmer waters of the Mediterranean. And before Russia has a say in this matter, they wanted to step in. Now, we saw a proposal a couple weeks ago by a couple U.S. senators. It had more to do actually with the F-35 deal, but there was also a couple lines on the Eastern Mediterranean saying that they would support Greece and Cyprus's efforts, and they were also planning on lifting the arms embargo to Cyprus. Now, these were actions that were viewed as very aggressive by the Turks. There's obviously a previous decision not to have any type of arms in the islands of the Mediterranean and the Aegean, and these types of actions would definitely escalate tensions. Now, Turkey doesn't want tensions escalated either. They're more interested in getting their share of the resources and having their brethren in northern Cyprus reap the benefits of these resources as well. Now, is this problem unsolvable? I don't think it's unsolvable, but it's going to take some important diplomacy, especially between Greece and Turkey, more than Cyprus and Turkey, between Greece and Turkey. I could see maybe Israel stepping in also. They're a major player in the region and a major player in the Eastern Mediterranean as well. So These aren't problems that are unsolvable. There's a lot of wealth to go around.
But it highlights these two points that I want to raise to you, Dr. Zenonas, that you mentioned that U.S. is, of course, interested in a peace in the region and it wants it to prosper. But also, can you acknowledge the fact that maybe this $9.3 billion deal, which is across the span of 18 years, also has a huge, the U.S. has a huge investment in it economically. And let's not forget its alliance with Israel, because this is the Israel pipeline. Israel will benefit largely from these massive resources.
There is, of course, profits to be made, but those regard primarily the companies. And of course, the U.S. is, of course, interested in safeguarding those economic interests and of the relevant companies, and is also interested in creating these economic and energy links between the states of the region, because it thinks, and this has been the U.S. strategy over the past years, they believe that these synergies and these networks of collaboration that are being developed will help eventually in the development and prosperity of the region. And on the other hand, there's also the problem with Turkey. So I believe that the U.S. is also sending a message to Turkey saying, if you keep going the way you're going, and if you keep polarizing the situation, we have alternatives in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we will try to use them if you're so difficult to collaborate with.
And they also seem to have a bone to pick with Turkey, as it is the U.S., over the purchase of the S-400s, right?
Of course, the strategic landscape is much broader, and it includes, of course, the F-35 and the S-400 and what's going in Syria and the EU negotiations about either the accession of Turkey into the EU or the refugee crisis and so on. But we need not to neglect that there are some problematic things going on in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that Turkey is indeed raising the tensions, and that the US is sort of calling on Turkey to cease those operations because Turkey does not have an exclusive economic zone in the Eastern Mediterranean. But it has not declared one, and it has not delimited one.
Right.
So
no,
it
but
has not the right to do what...
You are quick to highlight how Turkey doesn't have the right here. But here, Yusuf, if you could interject, please. What right does the U.S. have, especially considering that it's acting like a mediator at a time where it has a huge economic stake, and also not to mention what it owes to its allies there in the region?
Well, first thing, Turkey, the U.S. hasn't been called as a mediator, so it wanting to interject itself into this situation is a little ironic. And I wanted to touch on another thing that you said before, that the U.S. has a bone to pick with Turkey over the S-400s. Let's not forget that Greece had S-300s, and there was no problems made over their purchase of S-300s. But that's a different topic. I just wanted to touch on that. Now, the U.S. as a mediator, as I was saying before, I think their main concern is a possible Russian presence coming into the region, and they wanted to step in as a preemptive effort to keep Russia out of that area and out of this situation. Now, Turkey obviously has a right from its continental shelf to explore gas in the region. Now, as delimiting an exclusive economic zone is something that Turkey hasn't done, but they have a right to an exclusive economic zone. And as I was saying before, this is something that should be handled through negotiations bilaterally and trilaterally. We shouldn't have third parties like the EU come in and determine their external borders. That it shouldn't happen like that. Turkey should be able to sit down with Greece, or have maybe Greece mediate between Cyprus and Turkey, where these three countries can sit down and say, hey, this is your exclusive economic zone, this is mine, and this is theirs. Let's all get rich. This shouldn't be this big of a problem. What I see Cyprus's efforts, they're the ones escalating. They haven't sat down with Turkey. They haven't been able to reach a deal on where these borders are. And they're already handing out contracts right and left to everybody and saying, hey, what's the problem? I handed out these contracts. You need to sit at the table first.
Right. You have to sit at the table and talk with the parties who are concerned here. Thank you so much there, Mr. Yusuf, and also Dr. Zenonas, for your insight. We've come to the end of the program. We will see you again tomorrow. Till then, goodbye.